Think about the last time when something bad happened or when life just got really crazy. Were you able to think clearly and rationally, or did you just kind of go into survival mode and a lot of your habits and routines just went out the window? Well, if you're like most people, it's option two. And today we have a special bonus episode for you. And I have a special guest who's going to give us some insights about how to really create habits that help us better deal with those stressful situations. And that's coming up next right here on Unshakable Habits. The right habits can help you have it all: more time, better health, improved relationships, and less stress. But most people lack the tools to stick with those habits long enough to see results. That is about to change. Welcome to Unshakable Habits with your host, Stephen Box. It's time to take your habits from unsustainable to unshakable. Welcome back. This is a bonus episode of Unshakable Habits. I am your host, Stephen Box, and today we're talking about how do you build habits that allow you to deal with stressful situations. And I got to tell you, this might not be the first thing that you thought about, but where my head went was, who is someone that knows how to deal with these situations? What is a profession that has to be ready in the moment to deal with the unexpected and who knows how to really dig in and also is used to dealing with high pressure, high stakes situations? And that is why today I am very happy to share with you guys that we have a special guest, and that is Mr. Sean Clary, who is an attorney from the law offices of Sean M. Clary in Miami, Florida. So Sean, welcome to Unshakable Habits.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Sean, before we jump into this conversation on habits, I just want to tell people a little bit about you. So you are, like I said, an attorney in the Miami, Florida area, and you offer comprehensive trial litigation services across various legal domains, including personal injury, auto accidents, airplane and boat accidents, medical malpractice, product liability, wrongful death, divorce, and commercial litigation. So obviously you have a lot of expertise in these areas and you have a track record of success in representing your clients by filing a personal injury lawsuit. In other words, when we talk about people who deal with bad situations and needing to be able to do the right things, you're an expert on these things, because I imagine these situations, doing the wrong things, can be very costly.
It is. And I will tell you that doing what we do it's a hard job. It's a stressful job, but at the same time, if you don't love it, then you really ought not do it. And so I love what I do, and I've been doing it for a long time.
100% agree with that, man. And I would love to start here by hearing about some of your personal habits that help you to deal with some of the stressful situations that you find yourself in.
Personal habits. I first probably would start with health. I'm an avid workout person. I work out at the gym 5 days a week if possible. I do a lot of cardio. I do a lot of weights, and I'm not a bodybuilder type. I just do that stuff because I'm diabetic and I have to keep myself in shape. So I also try to eat well and not eat the bad stuff and do the best I can. Beyond that, getting good rest is something that I definitely try to do. And I spend a lot of time with my family doing different things, whether it be, we spend a lot of time here in Florida on the water. So we're avid boaters. We like to dive. We like to snorkel. But frankly, just being outside, whether it's walking my dogs with my wife or taking a walk with my wife on a Saturday morning, which we do every single Saturday, where we go and get breakfast together and just unwind, to spending time with our kids and having dinner every night as a family. So those are some personal habits that I have. And then in terms of work, I would just say that I am probably the person that overanalyzes things. And so for me, I have to read them, I have to see them, I have to listen to the testimony over and over again. And I think that by doing that, you develop these habits as a young person, and hard work is one of the things that I have always had, work ethic. And the habit that I think forms from that is just doing things repetitively and effectively over and over again with each of the cases that I have, learning more about each case, learning more about why the particular problem happened, knowing obviously the details of our particular clients, and caring for our clients more than anything, because we need to know our clients well in order to represent them effectively.
One thing I love that you pointed out there, and people may have missed it, is you talked about something that might come across as a bit of a negative, right? I'm an overthinker. And I know a lot of times when people have a trait like that, they do view it in a negative light. But you've turned it into a positive by saying, hey, I'm going to take my overthinking and I'm going to really dive into things, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not missing things, and I'm going to be really hyper-focused on the details so that I'm not missing anything, which obviously helps with the overthinking, because then you're like, I know I didn't miss anything because I was very thorough. But I imagine that's also a really great trait for an attorney to have.
I think you need it to be successful, and I think it's also something hard to achieve. The devil is in the details, and that's something that I think is really important for attorneys to understand, because it might just sometimes be one word that makes the difference, the complete difference in a case. It might be the law that you're trying to interpret. It might be the jury instruction that you're trying to explain to the jury in a trial. It might just be the simple word like safety. Why was there no safety protocol in this case? Whatever it is, it's that real intensive focus on the details that I think has certainly helped me get to where I am today. Now, having said that, I think that you have to be able to break these cases down into manageable tasks. You can't just be hyper-focused on every single issue all of the time, because that would drive you crazy. That's why I prioritize self-care and also stress management techniques, like I discussed before, with regular exercise and doing things like trying to effectively breathe and calm yourself down before you have a conversation, for example, with the lawyer on the other side of the case. Might be something that's maddening to you. It might be something that is going to result in an argument, but you got to try to keep your cool. You got to try to maintain your professionalism and do things the right way. And I believe the only way to do that is to listen to what the other person has to say, whether it's your client or the other lawyer, and then think about it for a minute. Try to breathe. I think our moms told us this when we were kids: count to 10 and then say what you really want to say. Think about, before you're going to send that email, maybe walk away from your desk, come back later and decide, is this really what I want to say? And by doing that, I think you make yourself more effective. I also think it takes the emotion out of it sometimes. Now, it's very important to have emotion as a trial lawyer, but you want to make sure not to be so emotional that you're not focusing in on what you really need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, there's that fine line. And I think this is something maybe people will struggle with just in day-to-day life even, where there are things that are really important to you, things that you have a lot of passion about, things that you deeply care about the outcome. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in those emotions sometimes in those situations. And whether you are in the courtroom or you're at home, it's important sometimes to be able to separate the emotion from that outcome and be able to look at things from an objective standpoint in order to actually get the outcome you want.
100%. And so in that regard, maybe you need to take a walk down the street. Maybe you need to walk around the block. Maybe you need to, literally, this is what I do every 30 minutes. I get up and I fill my glass of water and I walk back to my desk. And I think that just by taking those breaks from time to time, you have to give your mind an opportunity to reset itself. So again, just another habit that I use. Unfortunately, it means I'm going to end up using the restroom more often, but I think that's ultimately good for you too. And drinking more water is a positive thing. So anyway, that's how I do it. And those are some of my habits.
Yeah. People ask me, they're like, how do you get your steps in every day? And I tell them I just drink a gallon of water.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm not one of those people that keeps track of how many steps, but I'm sure if I did, it would be a lot, just like you.
Yeah. When you're constantly drinking water, you're going to get a lot of steps in. So it's a win.
That's right. That's right.
Could you maybe give me a specific example? And obviously, want to leave out any personal details that might identify anybody here. But can you give me maybe a specific example of a case that you've worked on recently where some of these habits really came into handy?
Absolutely. So there's a case that comes to my mind is it's a medical malpractice case, and there were multiple parties involved in it, and the evidence was highly contested. In that case, the argument was that COVID-19, obviously we all went through COVID in some way or another together, and it affected different people differently, but it also affected medical care and treatment. And in this case, one of the frustrating things to me was that the hospital was taking the position that COVID prevented its doctors from diagnosing the patient's medical condition timely. And our position in the case was, and ultimately we were right, was that the condition of this patient was so obvious they should have known what to do from the very beginning. But having said that, the whole fallback position for the other side, the company that we sued, was that COVID prevented them from figuring this out. So what we did is we went back and tried to figure out what was COVID all about and how did COVID change medical care and treatment. And our preparation and our legal arguments, we focused in on the fact that if you want to know something about a patient, you just have to talk to that patient. You just have to talk to that patient's relatives. And lo and behold, the patient's relative was standing right outside the emergency room. So they could have called this person. They had his phone number. They could have gone to the door. They could have talked through the emergency room doors even if they were open to half an inch, so that they could get the details from this person who was obviously concerned about what was going on with his loved one in that hospital. And then we went even further and we said, what are the hospital's protocols? How are they dealing with COVID at this time? And so they had a protocol that said you have to test anybody who's going to come into the hospital first before you let them in. You got to do a rapid COVID test. And I said, did they do that in this case before they let them into the hospital? And the fact is they didn't. Ultimately, what they were doing is they were keeping this person outside the hospital with the idea that we can't figure out what's going on with your loved one who's in our hospital. We're not going to talk to you. We're not going to use your phone number to call you. We're not going to get any details from you. And ultimately, now that it's too late, we're going to let you into the hospital. But they didn't even follow their own protocol to test him and make sure he was okay to let him into the hospital. At the end of the day, it's that focusing in on the micro detail of that case, which is why does COVID in any way, shape, or form affect the outcome here? And the bottom line is that it didn't. It had nothing to do with what was going on there. And when we dug more into this story, and again, the details of this case I don't want to get into any more than I already have, we just figured out that what they had right there in front of them, right in front of their faces, literally was more than enough information to solve this puzzle. It wasn't really a puzzle at all. It was right there, glaring, something obvious that they should have seen and figured out.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think something that really stands out for me there is a lot of times when we have behaviors that we're trying to change as individuals, we also take this approach of this thing happened, that's why things fell apart. And we leave it at that. So I think a really good lesson for the audience here, if when you're trying to change your habits, is dig into them. Ask those questions. Look at what things led up to it. If there's certain procedures that were in place or certain things that you'd routinely do that maybe you did something a little differently, is there actually something you did that could have caused you to have this behavior you didn't want? Because if so, there's now opportunity for change. Or even if you didn't do anything wrong, but maybe some of the things that you did leading up to it, you now can see in hindsight that they weren't maybe the best process. What changes can you make? Really great example of how just digging into the details there can help you.
And another thing I would add to that, Stephen, is that as lawyers, we're trained to look, as I said before, look into those details. And instinctually that if something just doesn't look or sound or smell, that maybe there's something more to the story. And to me, that example is a great one because while I thought it was obvious, I wanted to make sure I understood from the other side why they didn't think that it was. And the only thing they could come up with was COVID prevented us from figuring this out. And as I already explained, that was not a logical argument to even make. I think it was a fallback position ultimately, and I think it was the only position that they were left with. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter. We were able to get that case concluded, and the clients are better off for it. At the end of the day, just maybe another good habit to mention is just not giving up with your instinct. If your instinct tells you something, don't give up on that just because there are blockades that are standing in your way and you're being prevented from getting to the ultimate answer. As lawyers, we know we have to just keep fighting for our clients and try to get the answers to those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Something you mentioned earlier was that your profession can be very stressful if you let it. And I know we talked a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, like exercise and the breathing and things like that to help physically. But can you maybe give me an example of some cases that you've worked on that really challenged your resilience and your mindset, your ability to do that?
Sure. So I had a case years and years ago. It involved Bank of America. And although I'm a personal injury lawyer, I spend most of my time doing medical legal cases like medical malpractice or wrongful death cases. This was a case unlike any other that I ever handled that involved Bank of America. And so I represented these two very nice people. They were retired from St. Lucia, and they had deposited their life savings into a CD, a certificate of deposit with Bank of America. And they were told, because they were international customers of the bank, that their money was protected by a 21-step process. And what did that mean? That meant that in order to access their funds, to withdraw any of the money, they would have to follow 21 steps, protocol designed to protect their money in order to get it out. That included literally coming to Miami physically and signing documentation to allow them to do a withdrawal. Ultimately, in our case, we learned that not only was that 21-step process not followed, but literally what happened is the client's money was taken based on a phone call. So somebody was able to get through this whole complicated 21-step system by calling up and saying, "Hi, I am Mr. Ramjawan. I would like to withdraw the money in my CD." And lo and behold, $500,000 was taken out of their account. So that happened once. The client ultimately found out about it, called the bank, said, "What's going on with my bank balance?" Ultimately, the bank replenished the money. It happened again. It happened again. And it kept happening. And it was just so shocking to us that this would continue to happen over and over again. So again, I go back to what I was saying before. These habits that we develop in that case really helped me because I said, gosh, there's got to be more to this story. There has to be more on the bank's part that could be involved in why this happened. And so I started looking more into the management of this particular bank and how does their telephone system work. And then ultimately we found on the case that the last time the client's money was taken, again, it took the entire life savings that they had, the balance in the account was zero and the statement was sent to their home, but the address had been changed. So somebody within the bank had changed the address so that they never received their paper statement in the mail. And I said, how the heck is this possible unless the bank is involved? Long story short, and fast forward to what happened, we tried that case. We ended up winning that case. And in addition to getting their money back in full, they also were awarded punitive damages because we were able to prove that the system in the bank was so recklessly managed that this 21-step process was obviously not followed. But even then, above and beyond that, somebody within the bank had changed the mailing address on their account statements so that the money could be taken and that they wouldn't learn about it for months later. And the reason why that's important, we found out, is because the bank and the customer have an agreement. You have to notify them within a certain number of days. And if you don't, then your money's as good as gone. In other words, you change that bank statement address, there's a way to take that customer's money and not have to worry about the consequences because they can't sue after a certain period of time. Anyway, long story short is that the clients were made whole, and the bank, I hope, has changed their system today because you can't manage our money that way. I mean, these are folks that put their retirement savings in the trust and the care of this bank. And at the end of the day, it was simple habits that I follow in my own life that led me to what I knew was going to be the ultimate outcome in the case all along.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, was there actually an employee at the bank that was in on this and was part of what was going on? Or was it just a matter of they had some bad habits that someone was able to take advantage of?
So I think it was a combination of the employees and the system just not being followed by the bank. Ultimately, we were not able to determine where that money went. In other words, that somebody specific at the bank had taken it. We just knew that the bank was involved in that, and that's what the jury decided.
Yeah. So how do you feel like that case particularly challenged your own resilience?
Because we're dealing in a case, first and foremost, with two people from outside the United States that just, they couldn't find a lawyer to help them. So that it was a frustrating position for them to begin with. They had been to several lawyers who all said to them, look, under the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, the bank's contract is what controls here. And because you didn't notify the bank within 30 days, unfortunately, you lose, or 60 days or 180 days or whatever the contract said. And somehow or another, I was able to convince the judge and found some very old cases that supported us. It took a lot of time and effort, but we just basically stuck with it. We stuck with that case and we didn't give up. And the judge ultimately not only saw it our way, but when the case was appealed after we won it, as proof of the fact that we had accomplished the right thing and gotten justice for our client, it went up on appeal and the appellate court agreed. So our decision on the jury verdict was upheld, and basically it formed new law for customers.
Nice. So really it goes back to what you were saying earlier about when you have that gut feeling about something, when those instincts are telling you like, hey, something's not right, where a lot of attorneys were like, we don't want to deal with this. This seems like too much work. It's probably going to be a losing case. So they just didn't want to put in the effort. You were willing to take it on and at least dig into it and see, do we have something here? Is there something we can actually find?
100%. And I believe that as a lawyer, you can never forget who you are, where you came from, and the different values that you have in your life. And so for me, it was meeting with these folks and getting to know them and hearing their story. And they were devastated by what happened, understandably so. They were in their 80s. They had lost every penny that they had worked their entire lives to save. And so for this case, it was not a matter of life and death so much, but literally, what are we going to do next? We're beyond the working age, and so we don't have any money. So they were having to depend on their family. And at the end of the day, it was for them something that their lawyer stood behind them and was able to be dedicated to their cause. And I believe that I was able to do that because I just believed in their case, and I smelled something wasn't right and something didn't make sense to me, that you can't have this 21-step system and by virtue of a phone call, the money's just gone. Didn't make any sense. And that you can take advantage of the contract at the bank to prevent them from doing anything about that. Again, that just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm sitting here thinking about all the people that I've worked with over the years that you ask them, what have they tried to do to reach whatever goal they're reaching at that moment? And it's always some super overly complicated system that they've put in place. And the thing is, that stuff sounds really secure, but I think anytime you look at these big processes, there's so many opportunities for things to break down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that persevering through that and because when you're dealing with a big company on the other side of any one of our cases, you realize that not only do they have significant resources, but they're the ones that created these systems. So you have to not only learn these systems, but try to figure out what went wrong. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it can be frustrating. I believe that if you're on the right side, and I think that we certainly were in that case, and we are in the other cases that we have, that it's a worthwhile cause to pursue.
So I'm curious, what made you get into law? What made you want to become an attorney?
It's interesting. So I come from a family of lawyers. My dad has been a trial lawyer like me for, at this point, probably 50 years. And he still practices a little bit, but I really had no desire whatsoever to be a lawyer. I went to college at Notre Dame, and I was a biology major. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Like a lot of college students, I wasn't completely certain of what I wanted to do with my future. So I decided, you know what? I love the marine world, the ocean, and I love scuba diving. And so I decided, why don't I take some time to think about this, and I'll change my degree to marine biology. So with my parents' support, I did that. And ultimately, I took a job, and I was teaching scuba diving for Club Med all over the world. I was in Mexico. I was in Turks and Caicos. I was in many different places all over the world. And so I spent about 2.5 years doing that. And then after that, I said, I've really got to get my act together here and do something more. I love scuba diving. Don't get me wrong. It's a great sport, but I'm not going to do that for my career. And so I went back to my family roots, and I said, Dad, what do you think? And he said, you love scuba diving and you love the water. Why don't you do something like, for example, practicing law in those areas? And so I happened to look into it. We had a family friend at the University of Miami Law School, and I talked to him about the programs that they offered. And ultimately, I chose to pursue a degree in maritime law. So I was thinking I'd go to the University of Miami, I'd study all about the law of the sea, maritime law, ships, and things that would keep me in tune with the ocean and have an opportunity to be on a boat and do those sorts of things, but also be a lawyer. And ultimately, I graduated from University of Miami. I did a few of those cases, but it's not what I focus on. I do boating accidents and I jet ski accidents and those types of cases, but it didn't become my focus. But I guess ultimately, it's a long story short about how I ended up doing what I do today. And ultimately, and ironically, I come back to doing exactly what was in our family blood, which is being a lawyer, being a trial lawyer, and at the end of the day, representing people. And I've always been a people person too. And one of the jobs that I had, and I highly recommend anybody to do it, is to work in the service industry. I was a bartender, I was a waiter, and in those jobs, you really get to learn to talk to people, learn about them, find out who they are, where they're coming from, where are they headed to, what types of people they are. And you get people skills out of that as well, just the ability to talk to and listen to people. So I guess I combined all of those different diverse areas of my background and ultimately settled on being a lawyer. And I'm as happy as I was when I graduated. I love doing what I do. And occasionally I do those marine cases involving a boating crash, for example. But I also have an opportunity to live in a great place and do some boating that has nothing to do with being a lawyer, just enjoying life.
Yeah. I like the fact that you pointed out that everyone should go work in the service industry for a while. I did retail management for a number of years before getting into what I do now. And I not only think that people should be encouraged, I think it should be some kind of law. Like people should be required to go work with the public for a minimum of 2 years.
Interesting you say that, because one of the trial lawyer organizations that I'm part of, which is a BOTA, we're faced now in the day where we have Zoom and where we have these digital media ways of communicating, whether it be Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you use. And while these are great, the fact is you're not in the same room with the person. And you used to have to be in the same room with the person doing what I do. Now, you can take your depositions just over Zoom or whatever the platform is. You don't have to be physically present with the witness when you're asking him or her questions. And what that takes away from the lawyer is the ability to see the person and how are they reacting, and are they nervous? Are they fidgeting under the table? Is there something that is there a cue that I'm maybe missing that I'm not getting on Zoom? Yeah. And so it's just one of those things where you have to adapt to the new technology, but at the same time, you go back to what you were saying about the service industry. I believe that being able to communicate with people and having a job like that, which teaches you that you have to do it. You're working for tips. So you need to understand that if you're not pleasant with people, if you're not respectful to people, you're not going to make any money, or you're certainly not going to make as much. And it's just the right thing to do at the end of the day anyway. I mean, it really is what we all ought to strive for. But obviously, if you're working in a job, you want to get paid as much as you can. Do the right thing, and it ends up helping you out in the service industry.
Yeah, and I'm really big in communication. I tell people all the time, I feel like communication is one of those skills that is at the core of so many things. When I have clients that come to me that are having relationship issues, it's almost always something communication-wise. When they're struggling with something at work or trying to find that work-life balance, it's almost always a communication issue where they're afraid to communicate something to their employer. And even the way we communicate with ourselves a lot of times really hinders us.
Agreed. Yeah, you have to be willing to listen to yourself, and obviously willing to listen to and hear what other people have to say. And in terms of a habit, what I do in that regard is I try, when somebody's talking to me, to look at them, listen to them, and not necessarily take notes about everything they're saying. Because if I'm not really listening and I'm just more focused on my pad and trying to take down every word they say, you miss the meaning behind a lot of what they're telling you. And ultimately, as a lawyer, you've got to be able to follow up with your next question and figure out what they were just talking about when they answered your last question.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job, at least in my opinion. You've got to be able to really understand what the person is telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like, just from some of the cases that you've described, one of your maybe strengths is really listening and catching those details and then thinking about, okay, what am I missing here? What doesn't sound right to me?
Exactly. And I'll tell you something that has become a part of my practice that I really appreciate and have learned a lot from. So in terms of communication, we do something called focus grouping. And what we do, you probably are familiar with this. There are companies out there that focus group a new product. There are companies out there that focus group language that they're going to put in an advertisement, or as we do it in the law, we focus group cases so that we learn what people who are going to be like our jury think about the issues in our case. So we present them the case, good and bad. We have good facts, we have bad facts, and we try to present it as neutrally as possible. And we just let them talk. We let them tell us that this is what we think about your case. And we're very honest with them. And we say, listen, we went to law school, and sometimes we get our heads stuck in the books and we think this is what the law is and that's all that's important. At the end of the day, a jury might look at us in a trial and say, what are you talking about? This law that you think is so important doesn't matter at all. You missed it. Here's what the key facts are in the case. And so this focus group communication that we do a lot of for every case now, it just teaches you what is important to people that aren't lawyers, and how do non-lawyers think about the issues and the facts in your particular case. And I really enjoyed doing that. It's something that really, for me, has only started since COVID.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's something that everyone could really benefit from. It's taking that neutral approach to it. I encourage clients a lot of times to be a scientist, so to speak, where instead of looking at just what's there and making assumptions about it, like question things, really dive into it and try to see different perspectives, because we all have our own biases that are built in, right? It just from our upbringing, our environments, things like that. And if you don't check those biases, you can completely miss stuff.
100%. And just like you said, you're like the scientist in the laboratory. If you add this and you subtract this, what is this going to make? Is this thing going to explode? And the facts are that you've got to get those details from the people that are going to be the decision makers in your case. And obviously, we're not using the same jury that's going to try the case, but we're getting feedback from people who are going to be like our jurors. And that's critical because they decide whether we win or lose. They decide whether our clients are made whole and entitled to justice or not. So at the end of the day, it's so critical to what we do in every case.
Yeah, it's really an important thing. I mean, as a kind of an example here, one of the things I do is I help people with health. So we do look at things like nutrition and fitness and sleep. And my perspective of that is someone who has done probably 10 certifications at this point and practices for over a decade is so much different than someone who has maybe struggled with diets or struggled to be consistently in the gym. The things that are important to them, the things they think need to happen are so much different. So if I start talking from my perspective, it's just going to go over their head. They're going to be like, no, you're completely missing the point. What are you talking about? That's not at all what we got going on, because I'm speaking to the solution and they're still at the problem stage. And it's the same situation for you when you're presenting to that jury's not attorneys. They don't know the law the way you do. You have to help them to be able to see what the law actually is and explain it in a way that comes back to their current level of understanding.
Yeah. And listen, it's not just their level of understanding, it's what they feel. You've got to be able to convince them that your position is right, but so that they grab that idea and it's their idea. You know what I mean? And we're doing it in a completely appropriate way, because unless they've told us in a focus group that they like or don't like a particular fact, that's how we decide to use it or not. That we present our case because we believe it's the most effective way to do so, because we've heard the feedback and we've listened to their comments and we've incorporated those comments into the presentation of each case.
Yeah. So, Sean, we've talked a lot about habits and some of your habits, and I think we've really helped people get a few ideas on how they can learn from what you do. But I think we'd be a little bit remiss here if we didn't maybe take advantage of this time to dig into your expertise and pick your brain a little bit and give people some legal advice, so to speak. I'm putting legal in air quotes for those who can't see me right now. But can you maybe give me just like an overview of wrongful death and medical malpractice? I know you're specifically in Florida, so you need to make it specific to that, or maybe you can talk a little bit about how it might differ outside of Florida as well.
Sure, absolutely. I would start with the fact that if something unfortunate happens to you, that you have to realize first and foremost to use your own analytical skills and try to figure out, is there something that shouldn't have happened here? Something that you believe was wrong? Because ultimately, when you call an attorney, that's what the attorney is going to ask you. Why do you think there was negligence here? Why do you think there was medical malpractice here? That's what I ask my clients. I want them to be able to tell me what happened. And you also need to know, this is, in terms of the different states and how this applies, you also need to know that you need to make a decision about whether you're going to call a lawyer pretty quickly. Some states with medical malpractice have much shorter periods of time that you can do something, meaning filing a lawsuit, than others. Here in Florida, you can file a wrongful death case or a medical malpractice case 2 years after the incident. But let's be honest, when somebody suffers a tragedy, they're doing what everybody else does, which is they're dealing with their loved ones. They're trying to bury their deceased relative. They're devastated by the loss of their loved one. And it's not the type of thing that people think to do right away, meaning call a lawyer. And my point is, obviously that makes sense, and that's what I would do. I wouldn't be focused on calling a lawyer, and I am a lawyer. Yep. But the fact is that you don't have a lot of time to do it. And another reason why that's important is people's memories fade. They forget the details, those critical details. What did the doctor say? What did the nurse do? What did the driver of the other car that killed your mom or dad, what did that driver say or do? Those are the types of details that sometimes we forget. Talking to a lawyer early on, whether it's a family friend or somebody that you can be referred to, is a benefit because maybe there's something to uncover that you hadn't even thought of. In terms of medical malpractice and wrongful death, it just obviously depends on the case. You were there, and so the lawyer is going to try to uncover those details from you. But obviously, the types of details that you can provide depend on the particular case. For example, if you have photographs, if you have videos of things that you believe are important, if you were at the scene and there was a piece of evidence that you somehow decided to keep. I do a lot of products liability cases, which means a defective product. For example, if the tire is a bad tire, if the vehicle, there's something wrong with it that you believe caused the accident or contributed to the crash, if the seatbelt didn't work, if the airbag didn't function the way you believe it should have, those are critical pieces of evidence that you have to keep. I've also done a lot of medical device litigation over the years, and people don't usually understand this, and it wouldn't make sense to the layperson who's not a lawyer. But if you have something that's defective in your body and it's taken out by the doctor, it's got to be saved in order for you to have a case in most states. At least here in Florida, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to bring a case unless you have the product that you're saying was defective. So one of the first things I always ask new potential clients is, do you have the device? Do you have the tire? Do you have the airplane part or whatever it was that caused this tragedy? Again, without that evidence, sometimes we can't even help you determine if there is a case to bring. And so then beyond that, it's just the gathering of information. We talk to our clients regularly. We encourage them to call us. We encourage them to get us the details of everything that happened. And ideally to even do a narrative summary that they address to me as it's an attorney-client privilege letter where they set forth all the facts, tell us what happened and who said what and what happened when and who was there, those sorts of details and more. And then it's gathering information like their medical records and the medical records for their loved one and trying to just go through all that. With medical malpractice cases, we have to get those records because we have to get them to a doctor or a nurse or other healthcare provider who's in the same specialty as the person that we're claiming was negligent. And unless, at least here in Florida, unless an expert says that there was negligence, I can't tell you that there was because I'm not a doctor. So we have to, here in Florida, depend on the experts to decide whether there is or is not malpractice. And by the way, many times, even though the person thinks there was an issue or problem, the doctor tells us that there wasn't. And those are cases that I don't move forward with because obviously that wouldn't be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something more specific I can try to answer for you, but that was an overview that covers a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say you can give us a big overview. So I guess maybe to exemplify this for people, if they suspect that they have a case, that they something has gone wrong and they think that they might be entitled to some kind of compensation, what steps should they take?
First, I would say trust your instincts because I find it the rare situation where the person thinks that there was something wrong and there wasn't. Okay. Having said that, obviously, the first thing you do is try to record as much information about the incident, whatever happened, whether it's your phone and you're taking a videotape or your phone and you're taking a picture or your camera, whatever it is. You make sure to keep the names and addresses and phone numbers of any witnesses. Let's say it's a car crash and there's only one person who watched this event. You need to keep that person's contact information. You need to talk to that person so that person knows that in the future, maybe you're going to have a lawyer who's going to contact him or her. And then for sure, you need to contact the lawyer. And I do understand, as I said before, that it's a tragedy. So it's going to take some time for that pain either to heal or to be less so that you're able to talk to somebody about it. But you definitely need to do it sooner than later, again, because the clock is ticking against you, unfortunately. Every state has their statute of limitations. That's what it's called. And if you don't file a lawsuit before that statute of limitation expires, you can't do anything about it. I'm a lawyer. This is what I do. But I think it's important to at least find out if your legal rights have been violated and if you should bring a case sooner than later. If you don't bring a case, that's fine too, but at least find out if you have that right.
Yeah. You may or may not know the answer to this, and if you don't, it's fine. But do you have an idea what other states' statute of limitations is? What's the shortest period that people might encounter?
And I have done cases in other states, so I do know the answer as to some other states. I do cases around the country. In fact, I've got 4 or 5 different states that I'm handling cases in right now. With regards to medical malpractice, I believe that the shortest statute in the United States is 2 years. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct, just like Florida. There are some states that have 3 and 4 year statutes. There are also some states that, depending upon whether it's a wrongful death or just a personal injury claim, their statute is different. So like Florida, it used to be that we had 4 years for a basic negligence case that was not a death. Now we only have 2 years, and that's because of a change in the law in 2023. But there are some states where you have 1 year to do something about it. There are some states where you have even more than the 2 years we have here in Florida. And for cruise ship cases, you have 6 months to do something about it in terms of notifying the cruise ship operator, the company that owns and operates the ship, as to your incident. And if you don't do that, then they can potentially try to dismiss your case. And you have to file a lawsuit against a cruise ship within no more than 1 year of when the incident happens.
And even going a step further than that, because I know you mentioned in a lot of these cases, the attorney, have to go take the time to go find other experts and see if there's even a case or whatever. Really, the sooner that you can get in front of a lawyer, the better, because it gives them adequate time to see if you have a case and to be able to get everything filed, versus you're like, okay, hey, I've got a year and a half to grieve, and then I can go start this process.
Absolutely. No, unfortunately, it's a clock, and the clock is only working against you, but it's also working against you in terms of your memory of the details and everything that I discussed before. I think it's critical that you find out if you have the right to do something about it, whether you've been wronged and the law provides you the right to compensation for it. And then the lawyer and the experts will decide whether you actually have the case.
Okay. Are there any specific mistakes that people might make in these situations that they should be sure to avoid?
I would tell you that the most common mistake, at least with regards to the product liability cases, is not retaining the device, not retaining the medical device, not retaining the tire or the airbag or the seatbelt. Or, for example, when your car is totaled after a crash, the insurance company takes the car and they put it on a truck or they put it on a boat and they sell it for scrap. So that, I would say, is one of the most common mistakes, which is to think that your insurance company is going to take care of that car or airplane part or whatever it is for you. They're not. They have no reason to keep that for you. So you really need to get in touch with them right away, send them a letter right away to preserve it so that it's not lost. The other thing is that in malpractice cases or any cases where there's an injury and you're treated at a hospital or at a doctor's office, always try to get and keep the paper copy of the record. Now, in today's day and age, mostly it's electronic, but we still do receive, when we're discharged from the hospital, the paper discharge form. And why is that important? Because, unfortunately, I have learned that in certain cases, the medical records are changed. They're altered after the fact. And so when you leave with that discharge packet, within those records are some important details. And sometimes those details have been changed. It doesn't happen very often, thankfully, but it can. And so having the original records are always important.
Okay. Yeah, and I know a lot of times my wife is actually a veterinarian, and she talks about the importance of making sure that her notes are really detailed about everything that she does and what clients approve and what they decline and all that kind of stuff. Because like you said, in those records, there's a lot of information. And if people are doing things, if they're not doing things the right way, then that record's going to show that they skipped steps or that they didn't do things. And so it's super important to have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go back to what we discussed earlier. The devil is always in the details. If there's something that should not have happened, you can find it. You just have to, be dedicated and persevere and keep looking.
Yeah. So Sean, as we get to the close here, I would love to know, obviously, you're someone who is very detail-oriented. You're someone who really digs into those details, and you clearly care about your clients. But outside of those things, what do you feel separates your firm from other firms in your area?
So I would say that it's caring for the clients and really wanting to answer their questions. Clients have questions, and we're not afraid to talk with them, spend lots of time with them. If they want to come into the office and sit with us for as long as they want to do it, we do it. And to be honest with them, there are many cases that are not cases. There are many clients that call us and they say, or potential clients, and they say, what do you think about this case? And I'm just upfront and honest with them from the beginning. I don't hide anything from anybody. I just tell it like it is. And I think if you're genuine, that your client or potential client understands that, your client appreciates that, and it's the right thing to do. I also think that when you communicate effectively with your clients, as we've been talking today, habits like communication are critical in this business and most businesses. But if you really believe it and you do it, your client sees that and understands it, and you develop a better relationship with your client than you otherwise would have. Those are the things that we do. Those are the things that we do, and we try to continue to do that, whether it's calling a client back within 24 hours or less, sending an email if they send us an email in the middle of the night. You respond to it the next day and no later than that. And if you don't, you apologize because you were too busy, you were in a trial or whatever it happened to be. But you just make sure that you follow some basic rules of respect and decency. And then obviously results. We get great results, but I think that we get great results because we represent good people. We take the right cases. We prepare the cases with such level of detail, including the focus grouping that we discussed before, but also paying attention to those details, no matter what they are. Even one word can make a difference in a case. And at the end of the day, just treating your clients with respect. I think that's overall what we try to do with each and every person we talk to. And again, it's okay to admit that you made a mistake. If you make the mistake, that's what you do. Everybody makes mistakes. But at the end of the day, if you're open and honest with them, as we try to be with everybody, they just appreciate you more. And I'm happy to spend that time, even if it means I don't make $1 today, just having that talk with the client. I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, awesome. And before I have you give your contact information to everybody here, I do have one question for you, and this might be a tough question to answer, okay?
Okay.
If you could only choose one habit to tell people that they should work on, the habit that you feel has had the biggest impact on your life, what would it be?
I believe it's work ethic, and it's what gets me up every single day. It's what motivates me to get to the gym or eat well or get good rest. It's what helps me get through every day at the office. I try not to leave with anything left undone that I have time for. Obviously, my family's important, so I have to go home to them and obviously take time for your family. That's critical. But you've just got to have that work ethic, that drive to succeed and want to do a better job every day. And at least to me, that is the habit. I'm not sure if habit is the right word or whether I just happen to be lucky to be born with it. I don't know, but I've always been a hard worker, and I try to apply that habit or mantra to everything that I do.
All right. I love it, man. If someone would like to contact you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So our law firm, and again, we're here in Miami, Florida. We're actually it's not a suburb, but we're in Coconut Grove, Florida, which is part of Miami, Florida. Our address is on our website. Our website is www.SeanCleary, SeanCleary, P for professional, A for association.com. The phone number at the office is 305-416-9805. You can always send me an email. My email address is Sean, SEAN, at Cleary, CLEARYPA.com.
All right. Sean, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your insights and really giving us a little bit different perspective on habits and really showing how they can apply within your field.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And of course, I also want to thank all of our listeners today. If you wanted to listen to Sean's interview again, you can find it on the Unshakable Habits podcast. We'll have it listed as a bonus episode. And you can find the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, while you're doing that, while you're looking us up, if you like the podcast, if you love the podcast and you want to help other people find it as well, it would be really helpful if you could leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. We would definitely appreciate that. Also, this week on the podcast, I am interviewing Adam Javelin all about fear. We're talking about the fear of success, the fear of failure, the fear of change. And Adam has a lot of great insights that he shares with us this week. So I want to encourage you to also drop in, listen to that interview with Adam, and get those insights from him as well. But until the next time that we speak, I want to remind you, as always, that while none of us are born unshakable, we can all become unshakable.
Thanks for listening to the Unshakable Habits Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, please subscribe at unshakablehabits.com/YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. You can learn more about Unshakable Habits at unshakablehabits.com. Until next week, be unshakable, my friends.